Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for this lecture about the life and art of Clementine Hunter. My name is Callie Smith, the Educator and Programs Manager here at the LSU Museum of Art. And this talk is in correspondence with the Special Collections lecture series that is hosted each month at the main library at Goodwood. So definitely keep those future events in mind. All right. So, in preparation for the clip featuring the great-granddaughter Diane Brown, I wanted to show you another painting, another baptism painting of Hunter's, and also pair it with this photograph that is closer in the water. So you see in this photograph, there is the person being baptized, dressed in white, with a white band wrapped around their head. Behind him is a preacher raising their hand. And then you have likely two deacons or parish members, parishioners, who are there to assist with the baptism. This painting of Hunter's I find really interesting because often her river baptism paintings look a little bit like the ones we saw earlier, right? Where you go down from the church and then the river is sort of taking over that bottom third of the painting. Here we have things almost contained like in a pond or a lake. We have this giant tree in the center, and there's a lot of great visual parallel between the trees, branches, and greenery, and the circular pond. So those are both kind of circular shapes that are paralleling each other there. But other similarities, like with our other baptism paintings, there's a church, there's someone ringing the bell, there's women with their parasols, women in conversation. So that's all special to see. Okay, so let's turn our attention now to Diane Brown, who's going to speak about this ritual of river baptism. Several of Hunter's relatives were baptized in the river. This is not necessarily a practice that is done today. Some people do, but the act of where most of the congregation is baptized in a river is not necessarily the norm anymore. So again, Hunter is documenting for us this bygone ritual of the past. So let's turn our attention to Diane Brown, who's talking about some of the details of this experience.
Like she said about the baptism, the community would get together for the baptism. That would happen, in August, June, July,
once a year or
August?
something like that.
We would have like a revival. And then we would have I know you are not familiar with that, the mourner's bench. The mourner bench where you get on your knees and you pray, and then you confess Christ as your Lord and Savior. So that's how it led to the water baptism in the river. So the whole community would come together that Sunday morning. We would dress in our little white dresses.
And a white band.
White band around your head, and there's deacons and elders would take you out so far in the river and would baptize you in the river and have everybody in the community there watching you confess Christ as your Lord and Savior, and that would take you in the river and baptize you, come up. Then after that you would change out your little clothes and go to Sunday service. So that's how that works.
Okay, so just to follow up that clip that we heard of Diane Brown, here I would like to show, again, returning to that painting we've seen earlier, and then pairing it with a photograph. I love here that we do have these women with their parasols on the banks of the river. So we talked a little bit about how Hunter is documenting this bygone era. She's making labor visible. She's making visible the experiences of African American people. But specifically, I would like to lean into how she makes women's labor visible, how she makes African American women's labor visible. So here I've pulled a couple of details. One is women picking cotton. The other is a woman washing clothes. And what I love about these two images and what you see in many of Hunter's work is her use of texture, right? She applies this oil paint very densely, and that gives the cotton this very tactile sense, right? It gives the bubbles or the soap that's created by this repetitive rubbing of dirty clothes across a washboard and washing them, that that white application of that paint makes that labor very visceral, very real. And so, of course, these are movements that she did thousands and thousands of times, right? So she's making real for us the textures of this labor. All right. So again, here is that the surrounding painting of that detail of that woman washing clothes. Here we have a clothesline sort of being strung across the landscape, connected to the Africa house, that really distinct structure that's at Melrose Plantation. You have a woman with a washing board in her, and another woman also washing clothes in a purple dress with an apron. And then you have this large pot of what would have contained lye and other homemade soaps to sort of, I believe, boil and clean the clothes. So instead of a washing machine, that was what was used to soak them. So not only was washing clothes necessary for yourself during this period, but especially for African American women, washing clothes and doing laundry was a form of income. So at the Hunter and others living in the Melrose Plantation, at one point I read that they would wash clothes for up to 5 white families. So this again is making labor visible and is another thing that she's doing. I actually was talking to someone, I just want to say one more thing about this painting the other day, about what I saw as kind of this whimsical draping of the line across the canvas. But I also think she was like, well, sometimes, because of this repeated, this woman I was talking to recently, but while looking at Hunter's work, was talking about how, well, sometimes the weight of the clothing would sort of shake loose the post, and so there would be kind of this wobbling, drooping motion to the clothesline. And so I love how not only is it a fun line that goes across the canvas, but it could also speak to this repetitive use of the clothesline. Okay. So in preparation for the next clip from a relative of Clementine Hunter, I wanted to talk a little bit about another, what's often considered like women's craft. And again, I think this distinction historically between what is craft and what is fine art has often left women historically on the margins of art history, thinking about, oh, that's just like a craft you do to decorate things or to make the home. It's a domestic activity. But what I love about Hunter is through her art, she's showcasing the way that women make their worlds beautiful, the way that women participate in, as we see here in the bottom right, the way that they participate in these really significant life moments like weddings and wakes through making things like wreaths. So her granddaughter, her granddaughter Willie Mae Jefferson, talked about how her grandmother would make crepe paper flowers. And so what you have here is a book showing what that would have looked like. I'm not saying that Hunter used this book exactly, but for historical context, I wanted to provide this image for you just to show how ornate these flowers could be. So the pattern in the bottom left-hand corner is capturing just how detailed and elaborate these crepe paper flowers could be. So it's interesting to imagine that this bunting that we see in this wedding scene, the large flower that we see at the center, Even the flowers that the bride is holding, those could all be things that Hunter would have participated in making for these significant community events. One detail that many viewers have noticed over time, and that is certainly worth remarking on, is how Hunter presents women as often larger than men. We see that here, I think, in this painting of a wedding, where the bride and the bridesmaid, even the bridesmaid is larger than the bride. And what is often understood about this choice is that the more Hunter liked someone, the larger she would paint them. The less she liked someone, the smaller she would paint them. And so here perhaps we can see that she liked the bridesmaid or the maid of honor more than the bride, and she certainly liked these two women more than the preacher. Notice how small he is over here to the right of the groom, holding his Bible. So we can read that as her not thinking very much about him. So again, just like we had that child in the pecan groves shaking the tree to make the pecans fall, that moment of play, I think we can also see this playful humor of Hunter expressing her opinions of people. Here's a larger detail of the wake painting. So a wake would be holding vigil, sitting with the body before it is taken to its final resting place at the graveyard or the cemetery. What I love about this painting is that the grief of each of these women who are sitting in these 4 chairs is kept private to them, right? We're not seeing them in profile. We're not seeing them straight on. We're seeing them from behind. So they are still given this intimate moment of their grief sitting with this body. Of course, you have all of these lovely, colorful wreaths that are on either side of the casket. There's the large wreath in the center. There's the texture around the border of the casket that would be that highly textured fabric that would line the casket. So she's documenting all of this. Kind of like the crucifixion paintings that we saw earlier, where you had the 2 nuns sitting at the base of the cross, the 2 angels above, and Christ in the center. I think we can also see a lot of symmetry being used in this painting as well, right? Where the body of the dead is in the center, and you have this 2 women on either side, these 2 displays of flowers, the 2 window, and then the candle, this light above the dead person's body at rest. That light reminds me in some ways of the portal of her painting of Frenchie going to heaven that we looked at earlier. So again, there's this circular thing that despite all of this the symmetry, this light that's calling us upward. I can't talk about Hunter's paintings without talking about some of my personal favorites in her large body of work, which would be her nativity scenes or her paintings of Mary and baby Jesus. So here we have, I believe this is a painting that we have on view as part of our permanent collection in the LSU Museum of Art. What you might notice is that, yes, we have Mary, we have angels, we have a barn, we have candles, we have 3 wise men, but who are we missing, right? We're missing Joseph. So again, her spotlight on women and really sort of privileging and showcasing their stories is something that is really special about her work. Here, I love the composition of this painting. Also has some interesting symmetry to it, but also some interesting movement. You have on the left these large banana leaves, these big banana leaves, sort of arching over and creating this protective, almost like womb over Mary. You also have the angel's wings that create that curved movement that follows right up nicely to the curve the curved shape of the banana leaves. These leaves also mirror the curve of Mary's pregnant belly. So it's this lovely cocoon, very sort of like feminine moment over here. I love how she is not painting Jerusalem historically during the time of Christ. She is painting details. She's retelling this story. She's adapting this story for her own world and lived experience. So we have a barn that looks very much like the barns we might see in her paintings showing working in the field and the cotton gin and gathering cotton. You have cotton inside the barn, right? Her interpretation or adaptation of a manger would be this soft bed, this soft crib of cotton, which is again a material and something from her world. The wise men are dressed in clothing that you would see men wearing during her time and in her other paintings. And similarly, Mary is dressed kind of like the maid of honor, the bridesmaid, was dressed in that previous painting that we looked at of the wedding scene. So just this lovely moment. And I love how the trees are different. I really went on and on about the curve of the banana tree, but I like how the tree on the right sort of is more like a cube, and it sort of just frames the procession of wise men underneath. One last thing I'll mention is that the inclusion of the cross is really interesting. So the barn is almost like a church, the way that she paints churches. And it also, again, thinking about how in her paintings you have things happening in all at once, right? It's not only the baptism happening. It's before the baptism, it's after the baptism, it's someone ringing the bell, it's the women gathering after the lunch following the baptism. Similarly here, it's not just Christ's birth. We also have this inclusion of the cross, which is emblematic of his death. So again, birth and death coming together here, and this fusion of his life and these significant milestones being brought together in this scene. Okay, so just to reinforce the way that she's using details from her world, here on the left we have a photograph from the front porch of Melrose, the big house at Melrose Plantation. You can see this like large shaded shadows coming from the banana leaves of the banana trees. So I thought that was just a great thing to look at side by side. Another one of these paintings showcasing Mary. Again, look who's right in the middle of this painting. You have Mary, and at her knees is baby Jesus. The title of this piece is Mary, Joseph, Baby Jesus, and Butterfly Lilies. It's part of the American Folk Art Museum. It belongs to the American Folk Art Museum. Okay, so yes, Mary is physically painted larger than Joseph. The angel is right above whose head? Mary's head, right? So again, putting that visual emphasis on her. And in this next slide, what I've done is I've taken just an annotation, like a marking feature in PowerPoint to sort of highlight these formal composition details of Hunter's work. So these lovely curves of the wing of the angel, the curve of Mary's seated body, the curve of the goose, the curve of the lilies, the curve of Joseph's staff. So all of this is creating such wonderful harmony and unity. You have a lamb sitting to the left of Mary, and you have Jesus sitting to the right, and they're both at a similar height, really associating that symbolism of Jesus as the Lamb of God side by side. The goose, which her geese are actually pretty interesting, and Francois Mignon would call this particular version of a goose a gooster, I believe, a gooster, because she would give these geese like a red comb, just like a rooster has a a red comb, which is a fun, again, that playful detail that she'll put in and is so characteristic of many of her works. So there's a baby goose. That's really, really wanted to highlight with this. So there's this wonderful parallel of this mother goose, the baby goose, the mother of the Christ and the baby Christ. Okay, so in preparation for this next clip that we'll listen to featuring granddaughter Willie Mae Jefferson, I just wanted to show a photo as part of this oral history project. This is in Miss Jefferson's living room. She's showing us a birdhouse that she made of popsicle sticks that she painted. She also is surrounded by some of her grandmother's work, photos of her family, and we also have these curtains that you see in the background. And Miss Jefferson sewed those curtains. So these are these wonderful moments of how in her own life she has kind of continued this act of creation and expression. And so in the clip that we'll listen to, she'll talk about some of these skills that she learned from her mother, and she'll also make a reference to some of the names that her grandmother was called by. So here's the clip from Willie Mae Jefferson.
Well, my grandmother, well, I'll say first she was a great lady and a person. And I was crazy about her. We went all over the place and we did things together. Like I say, she taught me how to sew. She taught me a lot of different things. I could embroider, I could crochet, I could made quilts and all kind of stuff. What she did, I was right there looking. Only thing I didn't get was the cooking. I didn't go in the kitchen. I didn't stay by the fire, but she was the best person you could be, and I think most of the people you would talk to would say the same thing, because she was raised in that same area where she was where I was raised, and all of the people knew her. They got different names for her. Some of them call her T-Bay, Miss T-Bay, Clementine, and Clementine. They just, and so she was friendly with everybody.
Right, so she talks about learning to sew, learning to crochet. I wanted to showcase here some of Clementine Hunter's quilts. One is a chevron quilt, and notice how the textures of this quilt are a lot like her, the textures and use of color in her painting. Especially we see in the quilt on the right, which in the center you have a representation of the big house at Melrose Plantation with its kind of really distinct, it's a very symmetrical house with its two sort of pointed features at the side, at several windows. We have Africa House to the bottom right. I believe Yucca House would be at the top, and I think Ghana House, which would be another structure, would be to the bottom left. So I say all this because her use of space on the quilt is a lot like her use of space in her paintings. So I love that detail, and I always laugh when I listen to it when Willie Mae Jefferson talks about how she got a lot of things from her grandmother, but she did not get her cooking abilities or her skills in the kitchen. And this leads me to highlight a project that Clementine Hunter and Francois Mignon, so that French guy who wasn't French, did together, which was the Melrose Plantation cookbook. This is the opening page where we have Hunter signing in a crown her initials, C and H, and then Francois Mignon signing beneath her. So this includes several interesting recipes. A lot of the names of them are in French, so I won't try to butcher that here. But I do love how we have things like Marie Therese salad and the Grandpère Augustine salad. as well. These would be, if you know about the history of the Cane River region, these would be these iconic sort of the matriarch Marie Therese Kwan and her son Augustin Matuire, who are sort of the origin story for many of the descendants in this region. So he's highlighting bits of this history in the titles of the recipes in this. I love this photograph. Before you get into the recipes in this book, there are some lovely photographs of Hunter. This one's so great. Look, her looking up at the trees while smelling this floral branch. In preparation for the next clip that we'll hear, featuring another granddaughter of Hunter's, Dolores Sewell, I wanted to show you this really interesting painting. It belongs to Tom Whitehead, who is a biographer of Hunter along with Art Shiver. And this would be a painting showing the installation of a private phone line. So Hunter, as we'll hear in just a moment from her granddaughter, if she wanted something, she got it. And so what we see here is her painting how she remembers getting her own private line. That way she didn't have to be on the party line with everybody else and share the phone. So these are people from the phone company installing the phone line. Okay, so here's the clip from granddaughter Dolores Sewell sharing a really fun story that captures if Hunter wanted something, she got it. And as Dolores will say in this clip, she encouraged her family to do the same. So let's listen.
And I was telling Diane, I think she was, like I say, when she wanted something, she wanted it, and she was going to get it. And I would take her places, and you money back then, and like say, she wasn't rich or nothing, but she liked chains, the golden chains, and this is kind of funny. We was in this jewelry store, and she asked the lady to open up the case to look at the chain, and she just wanted to look at it. She didn't ask her how much it was. She say, "Oh yeah, I want that one," and I looked at it and I say, "No, Mama, you don't want that because that's $300-400. She say, "Don't ever do that no more." She say, "If I want something and I don't care how much it costs, I'm going to get it. So for you to be the same. If you want something and you got the money, buy it. Don't care how much it costs." And I never told her anything else about what you wanted to buy no more. Yeah, I was trying to stop a sale, I guess. But she wanted it, so she got it. So it's simple little things like just a simple woman. But like I said, whatever she wanted, she got. Mm-hmm. And she told us that.
Okay. So just to give a sense of scope of how well-known Hunter was during her life. Of course, we know her very well today, and her legacy as being one of the great artists continues. Here are some photographs from Look magazine. I have the in-color version to the right, but this was it was in 1953. The 1950s were a big time for Hunter. This is when she really comes onto the art scene as this person of interest and starts to sort of rise to fame and to notoriety. So we also have in the 50s one of her first significant exhibitions, which would be what was then called Northwestern State College, which is now Northwestern State University. The image that I've pulled here is the exhibition program for this exhibition that was in 1955. What is notable about this is that Hunter was not allowed to go see her own exhibition because of segregation. The experience of going to the gallery to see her art in this museum was for whites only. This is the height of Jim Crow, segregation, and so there are variations of how Hunter was able to see her work, but one main story is that Francois Mignon helped her sneak in to see her exhibition at Northwestern State in the Natchitoches region, or she was given special permission to go. So there's variation, but nonetheless, I think it's really important to remember that all of those, that context is very much part of her story. I love here on this program, she had this program, she took it and she drew herself holding a parasol. And so it's this wonderful moment of visual intervention, of counter story, right? Like, you've done this, but I'm here. And I love how she puts herself on this program of an exhibition that she was not allowed to see without great challenges. Showing another clip, like I mentioned in the introduction, she was the first African American artist ever to have a solo exhibition at what is now known as New Orleans Museum of Art. Then it was called Delgado Museum. So here's a newspaper clipping. We can certainly see the dated language of this article that's talking about this show. That was in the Times-Picayune, New Orleans, and that was in 1955. I don't believe Hunter ever went to New Orleans. I think the furthest south she traveled was Baton Rouge, so she did not see this show. In this clip, all of these clippings of newspapers from major publications to local museums are sort of setting the stage for this memory that great-granddaughter Sharon Jefferson Banks shares about her grandmother. So Sharon Banks lives in Baton Rouge. Her mother, granddaughter of Clementine Hunter, Willie Mae Jefferson, who we heard from earlier, also lives in Baton Rouge. And in this clip, Sharon Banks is talking about seeing this, an example of Hunter responding to people coming to visit her, right? So there's this story of her celebrity and how she's reacting to it. So let's give it a listen.
All the time, I watch her paint. I watch her paint all the time, and I'll watch the people come and they'll want to paint something. I remember one lady. She was on her knees begging, "Please, Mama T-Baby, please, T-Baby, paint me a picture. Please, T-Baby, paint me a picture." And that lady sat there till Mama T-Baby finished painting that picture and left with it wet. It wasn't even dry. She took it with her. She begged for that. And they would come, like buses would pass by. I remember LSU had a bus full of people came and they knocked on the door, and Mama T-Baby, one of her days, she just didn't feel like talking that day. And they wanted to talk. And she was like, "Well, I ain't tell them to come up here." She didn't want to come out and talk that day.
So in order to set us up for the final clip from a relative that I'll share with you from our ongoing oral history project is this great process photograph. So the clip that we'll hear in just a moment is great-granddaughter Stephanie Sewell talking about seeing her great-grandmother's artwork in progress. Here we have Hunter would eventually, not in the beginning of her painting career, as we could see with like the sick room painting in the beginning and some of her other earlier works, but later she would start to make an underpainting in a solid color. So like here we have an underpainting done in yellow, and then she would draw her figures with pencil over top. And then, of course, as we know, she would later go, as in the case of this painting, which was a process painting for a cotton picking scene, add the cotton details, add the clothing colors, and other details. Okay, so let's listen to this childhood memory of great-granddaughter Stephanie Sewell.
I just know growing up in her home, the back room was what we call her paint room, and we weren't allowed in there. But at night, me and my cousin we always spent the weekend, like every weekend we were there with our grandmother, which is my mom's mother, which is Clementine's daughter, Mary. We would be there with her. And so at night, once Clementine, we called her Mama T-Bay. So I'll probably reference Mama T. When she would go to bed, we would sneak in the paint room and just kind of look around. And, we didn't touch anything because we didn't want to get in trouble. But just seeing how she started her paints and then how she would finish them. So, like, we might sneak in and she just started one. And then next couple of days, she's finished it. So it was kind of fun just to see how, it started and then the finished product. So we would do that. And I'm trying to think. I think one time we did get caught in there and got in trouble. I think we knocked over something, so we got in trouble about that. I probably was maybe 5, maybe, or so. So, yeah, that's like one of the memories I have.
You have one, girl.
So as we start to move closer to the ending of this presentation, I would like to turn our attention to these abstract pieces that I talked about at the start of this talk. Again, this is the same photo I used earlier. The images on the left are 2 of these abstract works. You can see they're quite different than Hunter's other more narrative-based scenes that we've seen previously or that you may have known of. And then the image on the left is a black and white photo. This comes from the biography by Tom Whitehead and Art Shiver, Clementine Hunter, Her Life and Art. It's showing an early installation at the Scotlandville branch of the Baton Rouge Public Library system when it was earlier in time. Okay, so how do we get these abstract hunters, these rare abstract hunters? And a lot of this has to do with this man named James Register. So he comes along also in the mid-40s, early 40s, 50s. He eventually moves from Oklahoma, where he was working as a clerk at the Oklahoma State University in Norman, or the University of Oklahoma at Norman. Forgive me if I get those flipped around. He was working as a clerk kind of in the archives for the agricultural department as part of that university. He also had this interesting time as a poet and a writer. He wrote a collection of folk poems that he received some acknowledgement for, some fame for. So he had his own artistic interest. He, though, becomes part of these guests at Melrose Plantation and eventually a resident of the area. And he somehow convinces Hunter, who we know is very headstrong, as we've heard in these clips, to try out other styles of art making. So my understanding for how these paintings came to be composed is that he would create collages out of paper and magazine clippings, and then Hunter would reference his collages to create these more abstract works. She really, based off of all the sources that I reviewed, she really did not like creating these more abstract works. She said they made her dizzy, they hurt her head. They were just not her favorite mode of making art. But I also wanted to showcase another project that Hunter did. Like earlier, we looked at the cookbook that she did with Francois Mignon. Here we have a project that she did with James Register called The Joyous Coast. It's a children's story, young adult story. It's like a mini micro chapter book about the ducks of Cane River and how smart and clever they are. So he wrote the text and Hunter illustrated it. I love this illustration here of the duck running. And Cane River ducks are the smartest ducks, is the caption that we see beneath this illustration. But again, you can definitely see that it's fun to see her duck character and her rendering of that. But we have the church, which is a recurring detail that we see in her other paintings. We have the trees and the landscape. So fun detail. Just want to kind of breeze past some other images from this project because it's something that maybe was really new to me and isn't such a well-known project that she did. The title, The Joyous Coast, comes from this distinct geography of the region, right? Between the Red River that we have in this illustration on the right and the Cane River that we have on the left. So that region between those two rivers is called the Joyous Coast. Here's another great illustration by Hunter of some of these Cane River animal characters and friends that feature in the story. One last one, because they're just so charming. Here we have a mother duck teaching these little baby duck students, and they're doing some arithmetic on a chalkboard. Okay, so thinking about, yes, there was that period of time where Hunter was working with Register on that project and experimenting with abstraction. But it's fascinating to see her sometimes return to that more abstract mode like we have here in the 1975 painting. This is unique because it is quite abstract with her use of colors and textures, but it's also an instance of collage. So the detail on the right is showcasing this photograph that's applied at the center of this painting with the decorations around it. So again, that repetitive mark making across the full canvas is very different than her larger sweeping strokes that we see often in the sky or in the river or in the fields. What's also interesting about this painting are these two figures that you'll see at the bottom left and right. And so here I've tried to circle for you where they are. And so what you see in the image on the left is a figure seated in profile. It looks like they're wearing some type of costume, or maybe they're not even human. Perhaps they are a bird creature person, quilt person. I don't know. The patterns and the tech, it's all very interesting, but it is somewhat human-like, right? Because you have a torso, a head, and legs and arms. Similarly, the figure on the right is also in this intriguing outfit, holding a bottle, sitting in profile. So I'll go back here to the larger collage. You can kind of see now that I've pulled it out, these figures flanking either side of the painting. The sort of center area that surrounds Hunter could be reminiscent of a garden, of a wreath, of the portal, that we've seen in some of her other works. I don't know. It's a very curious piece that still maintains a lot of her voice as an artist through this color. Okay, some other interesting works of Hunter's that are maybe a little less known than her more narrative scenes of working in the field or of baptisms and funerals would be these Black matriarch paintings. So here we have a single figure seated in profile with these colorful head wraps. And so thinking again about Hunter's some of the things we've talked about in this presentation so far, right? This emphasis on women. Here we certainly have that with this woman being given, this figure in this painting being given the utmost focus and attention. We also have Hunter's use of her familiarity with textiles, right? Like as someone who is a seamstress. Here we have these really beautiful patterned pieces of cloth over the woman's head. So these are interesting because the profile is quite different than the profiles we see in some of her other paintings. So here I've just pulled the two profiles from the Mary paintings that we've looked at previously. The profiles of the two matriarch paintings are almost identical, which sort of suggests that she may have used a stencil to create that profile and then added the clothing and the headdress later. Uh, One thing that I would always love to know more about is Hunter's visual world. What paintings, artworks, imagery was she exposed to? We know that she enjoyed watching television kind of later in her life, so that would be one source of visual culture that she's responding to. But I have to also wonder if she ever saw paintings like these two that I have on the screen of women in tignons. Because many, of course, the details of this focus on a single woman, this portrait, this attention to her face and her headdress really remind me of these paintings. So closing out, near the end of Hunter's life, as she continued painting, but she was afflicted with eyesight issues, with arthritis and other ailments. So this is one of Hunter's last paintings. It also belongs to Tom Whitehead's personal collection. You can see, the figures are more blurred, but from what I can make out, there are potentially 3 human figures in this painting in a field with a mule or a donkey kind of at the center. Thinking about perspective, going way back to that painting at the beginning of the talk with the sick room, the painting of the woman in the bonnet over the sick man in the reclined chair. Here we have a more zoomed in scene that's not using stacked perspective as much as some of her other larger paintings. So it's kind of interesting to have that return to this sort of focal, more familiar use of perspective. Of course, we're either watching this or attending this lecture because we are interested in Hunter's work. We admire her. She continues to have such an impact on history, on art, inspiring artists today. So I wanted to turn that attention to how her influence lives on. One of those outgrowths of her influence would be Robert Wilson, the experimental playwright, director, musician, composer. He wears many hats. And he met Clementine Hunter. Robert Wilson met Clementine Hunter when he was 12 years old. And as legend, story, fact has it, meeting her and seeing her work was his first time of understanding what art is and what it can do. So she was a foundational artist, the origin point of his own artistic career. So he makes this opera inspired by Hunter's life called zinnias, like the flower zinnias, which Hunter painted often in her work. Here are a couple of more images from this opera. I have yet to see or know how to access a recording of this performance. Again, it was in 2013 at the Montclair State University in New Jersey. But what looking at these images really revealed to me is how well her paintings adapt to the set, to the stage. And I think a lot of it has to do, again, you have all of these stories happening all together, all at once, like we see with her, especially with her weddings, baptisms, and funeral paintings. So creating and adapting her details from her painting to the stage is just so cool, right? And I think her paintings, in short, I know I'm rambling, but her paintings are a bit, there's theater, there's drama in them, and they really adapt well to a limited use of space. Just like the stage is limited, the canvas is limited, but she finds a way to navigate those and tell the story in a special way. Okay, so October 1st, as of 2019, is officially Clementine Hunter Day. Here is an image showing the family. The woman in the center with the yellow jacket is her granddaughter, Willie Mae. Stephanie and Diane and Dolores and I believe Sharon may be there somewhere. They are also photographed here to celebrate this occasion of Hunter receiving her own day of honor. So each year, be sure and look at Hunter's artwork, send a special thought to her to celebrate this day. And if you're watching this before the October 23rd conclusion of the LSU Museum of Art's exhibition, celebrate by coming to see her work. That would be a great way to do it.